Welcome to Citizens Assembly Thunderdome, where we test ideas and hone debate skills in a real-life social political arena with the goal of holistic balance. If you'd like to participate, find out how in our podcast description. Let's start with a round of introductions from our panelists. We've got about 30 seconds apiece to tell our listeners a little bit about ourselves and what's on our mind at this moment. I will start. My name is Megan Draving, and I am based in Texas for right now. And my points of interest are in human nutrition and education. So I will now pass it over to Stacy. If you would please introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, I'm Stacey Gustafson. I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas. My main focus is holistic community problem solving. And on my mind right now is I just heard another great thing about Citizen Assembly reaching more people. And I know we say that like regularly, but big things are happening. So yay. Thanks a lot.
That is great news. Thank you so much, Stacy. We have Tommy who just joined. Welcome in, Tommy. We'll give you a couple minutes to get situated and we'll come back to you. So Sherwin, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sherwin. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. My primary interest in is looking at how capitalism currently is creating unnecessary suffering and whether there's any societal systems that can focus on the unmet needs of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Sherwin. Cezary, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Cezary, and I am very excited about how we are growing and reaching more people. And I love discussing ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Cezary. Cynthia, would you please introduce yourself?
Well, you know I will. My name is Cynthia Leonard. I'm currently residing in Bentonville, Illinois. My main interest as a thinker person is, and if I can piggyback onto Sherwin, the amount of suffering I see being inflicted on society unnecessarily is an abomination to me. So I seek to alter the cycle of abundance that we currently are experiencing for a better world overall. Thank you. Oh, and I'm a promoter organizer for Egora-IOP.org.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cynthia. Reagan, would you please introduce yourself? And it's nice to meet you, by the way. I don't think we've met before.
Thank you, Megan. I'm Reagan Carnes. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. Former software engineer and now a novelist. And my interests are in variable architecture, democracy.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Reagan. Alex, would you please introduce yourself to the group?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm currently based out of Chicago. I'm happy to hear about Citizen Assemblies' recent growth, and I look forward to tonight's discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. Anne, it is nice to meet you. Would you please introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, first let me apologize for not having my video on, but my bandwidth just freezes up. But fortunately I can see you all just fine. I live in Washington, D.C., and I would have to say one of my focuses lately has been on energy and how as a society we're going to rationally achieve carbon zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever the target is. Insofar as that, sure, we all want to be at renewables, but renewables aren't going to be able to supply all our energy needs by 2030. So the getting from here to there in a practical way, that's kind of the sort of thing I've been thinking about lately. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Anne. I'll pass it over to Daniel. If you could please tell us a little bit about yourself.
I hope I fixed my audio. This is Daniel Tweed, KK6VDR, Thousand Oaks, California. A twice candidate for city council. It's keeping the money out of politics by not raising or spending any, and going to run again in 2022. And my project currently is Quality Progress, to be debuted at coupon.info or coupon.life, and making a quality vote. I'm working with a group that's trying to make our votes go from binary to brainy. It's a short explanation. So thanks for letting me be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Daniel. And then last but not least, Tommy, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Tommy Weir. I live in Indiana within the United States of America. And my interests are energy medicine and helping to heal one human at a time so that we can have a better world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tommy. All right. So everybody got to introduce themselves. I don't think I left anybody out, right? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to move on to today's presentation. And today, Stacy will be presenting her idea on transhumanism, which has been written up to share with others in Egora, the worldwide stock market of ideas, which you can find at egora-ilp.org. Egora is an online platform where people from all around the world can turn their ideas into policy to build a better world. Stacy is going to start screen sharing this idea and proceed with the reading. Stacy, you are muted, by the way. I'm not sure if you knew that. We can't hear you.
Oh dear. Thanks. I will start screen sharing again.
There we go. Take it away.
Okay. This is based on the Journal of Medicine and Philosophy article, Bioethics and Transhumanism by Alan Porter, 11 May 2017. The definition of transhumanism from Wikipedia. Transhumanism is a philosophical movement, the proponents of which advocate the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies able to greatly enhance longevity, mood, and cognitive abilities. The article discusses three forms in transhumanism: the 1, current human; the 2, transhuman, on its way to becoming the 3, posthuman or goal. Transhumanism is here, and we need to acknowledge and discuss it if we want to have an influence on its direction. I wish to focus on what I believe are the key issues to understand. 1, equality; 2, gene splicing and value judgments; 3, personhood; 4, ancient philosophy and mythology for humans' ideals and aspirations; 5, the overhuman or posthuman. Equality. Will everyone have equal access to these enhancements? Will enhanced individuals treat non-enhanced individuals equally? Gene splicing and value judgments. Scientists today are already creating human embryos with gene splicing. We must become involved on a community level now if we hope to have any influence on the directions and outcomes of these experiments on our collective humanity. There is no univocal consensus across communities about norms like what is health, fitness, beauty, intelligence. What ideals will be chosen for enhancement? Will future generations have the same goals and judgments? For example, should hyperintelligence be pursued, or would future humans prefer the bliss of ignorance? Hyper-accentuated secondary sexual characteristics desired today could be detrimental or not valued in the future. Personhood. Multiple sets of principles or tests have been debated to decide what is a person and how will they be treated. You could state that also as consciousness. If the posthuman becomes as different from current humans as is envisioned, the general population needs to be an active part of the conversation and legislation as this movement evolves. For instance, as new levels of human consciousness evolve, will the old levels lose the rights of personhood? Ancient philosophy and mythology. Transhumanists often refer to ancient philosophy and mythology, such as Prometheus, Plato, and Aristotle. I believe it is debatable whether these are valid and correlative to the decisions made going forward. And the overhuman or posthuman. The goal of the transhumanist movement is to achieve a sort of universal godliness far beyond the abilities of a current human. Some say the difference will not be like a high IQ versus a low IQ, but rather like a human compared to a beetle, with the current human being likened to the beetle. If this is a valid comparison, the current human needs to be utterly aware of everything the transhumanist movement is doing and advocate as strongly as humanly possible for what Nietzsche termed the eternal return. In light of what I believe Nietzsche considered the potential dire consequences of an all-powerful overhuman, he said, we should act only according to what we want to become universal law.
Great, thank you for sharing, Stacy. So we're going to go ahead and measure, We're going to measure the panelists' initial agreement with this idea. So can we please see a show of hands of who currently is in agreement with this idea? Okay, we have Daniel, we have Alex, Cezary's like, maybe. Is that a hand up, Cezary?
Yeah, it's kind of a
Kind of.
Okay, so general right now, so we have Alex, Cezary, we have Daniel, and Stacy. Anybody else? Okay, and then I also want to ask, is anybody currently supporting this idea in Egora? Okay, well, maybe that we can change that after our discussion. So now we're going to open up the floor for debate. Who would like to start us off? I see Cezary's hand up. Oh, actually, before that, if anybody wants to talk, please type hand up in the chat and we'll be able to keep track of who's next. But Cezary, you are first.
You know, regarding who supports it, I think I actually also would support this idea. I want to read this idea again because there's a lot to consider there. And in that first reading, I didn't have a chance to absorb it all. But I think this is a story that everyone should hear, which is why I think this, at least for some time, this might be an idea that I will support in my stories everyone should hear community, Egora community. Yeah, Egora community, yeah. So I think I am going to support it, but I do want to discuss it further. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. Thank you, Cezary. I'm going to go to Cynthia because she asked a couple questions first, and then we'll go to Tommy afterwards. So Cynthia, you can go ahead.
Yes, I really wanted an answer to the question that I asked in the chat. Can you tell me exactly what arguments you're referencing by Plato, and Aristotle that support the continuation of the life cycle, please?
No, it was taken from the article.
Okay, thank you. The only reason I ask is because Plato is very clear about how he feels about the end of life and what that means to him as defined in Phaedo, which is why I was a little confused as to why their names were part of that. But thank you.
There was a little more detail in the article. Well, there was a lot more detail in the article about things that transhumanists bring up that relate to those. And I don't remember it being the specific thing you were talking about, but clearly the article is just a summary.
Okay, so we're now going to Tommy.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to understand, Stacy. You looking for support on transhumanism? And then also, what exactly is the way of changing the human being? I don't really fully understand that, so that's why I don't know how to agree to it or not.
That's a good point. Okay, Daniel, you are up next.
Yeah, I would define transhumanism strictly as a philosophical movement right now. The article ended saying that it has a goal, and the goal was definitely to become hyper accelerated over ordinary humans. So I would take issue with that part. I think if anything, transhumanists are trying to be anticipatory about the implications of it and make sure it doesn't get out of hand and make sure it is, shared and administered in a humane, equality, based way, if possible. There are some fringe elements in the transhumanist movement that just, are very incredibly selfish and godlike, it's centered on gaining godlike powers, but, that's true of all humans. So, you can't really put that on the transhumanist movement. There are kind of narcissistic psychopaths in every population, I would think. So that's my comment.
All right, very interesting, Daniel. Cynthia, I know we called on you earlier, but your hand is still up in the chat. So did you have anything that you wanted to add? Okay.
You know what? I did have one more comment real quick.
Sure.
Yeah, when Cynthia mentioned the reference to Plato, Plato wrote about Atlantis, which was some say, mythical civilization which attained, godlike levels of technology, and it ended badly for the Atlanteans. So I think the consensus among most historians is that it was an analogy, a kind of a cautionary tale that Plato was expressing with his writings about Atlantis. So that was my Plato tie-in. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So I'm up next, and then we're going to go to Cezary. And Stacy, if you ever want to jump in, just type in a hand up, and we'll go to you. So the issue that I have with this idea that's holding me back from supporting it, I kind of agree with Tommy in that I want more clarity on what exactly it is we're advocating for, because what it sounds like to me is some kind of utopian society, similar to the Brave New World society, which if we read the book, we clearly know it's more of a dystopian society, especially the concept of gene splicing. I looked it up and I briefly saw like genetic engineering, and I think I don't think that's a good idea at all. It just sounds like we're trying to create like an artificial world that's utopian, but in the end will usually end up being dystopian, because if we, I think us humans already have everything that we need, and I think to prosper and to become the best that we are, and I think a lot of what we need to do is really take away the programming rather than add. Okay, Cezary, what do you have to say?
So I just want to say I already supported this idea, but it's like I said, it's in the stories we should all hear. I think this has a lot of information for people to consider. But yeah, it just, not in the main Egora, but in the community Egora. And then, so first of all, I do have a question. What is the eternal return? And I mean, I'm just curious if somebody can answer that. I get the overall meaning, but I'm just curious what Nietzsche meant by eternal return. And then I think that, with this whole humans controlling evolution type of thing, essentially, that's what it comes down to, is it's centrally planned evolution. And that's just not going to go well. It just doesn't go well. It is guaranteed. It's not a question of whether will this lead to bad things or good things. It's going to lead to bad things. It's going to lead to monocultures, basically. That's just how humans work. Consciously, that's how, people develop fads and develop monocultures. And yeah, this will be messed up. But I am in favor of eugenics, actually. But I think eugenics needs to be done in a decentralized way. I think it should be, I think people should be much more careful in how they select their breeding partners. I think what we need to do is do more like cultural awareness, or just having a better culture that emphasizes good values that we want to see perpetuated, and people who enter into relationships and to have children, that they do so wisely, with also not just how they feel about somebody, but what kind of children are they going to have together. So I think that should be a much bigger consideration. So yeah, I'm going to stop there for now.
All right, interesting. Thank you for sharing, Cezary. Before we go on to Alex, I just want to read what Stacy put in the chat. She said that the explanation of the eternal return, to answer what I believe Cezary proposed, is that the eternal return is that we should only enact what we want to be universally true. And then Stacy also said that her idea is advocating for understanding, awareness, and active attention to the progress of this movement. So Alex, what do you have to share?
So I think I read the text a bit different than the people who have spoken thus far. I took it to mean that Stacy was advocating for sort of community level involvement in what is considered acceptable under the guise of transhumanism. And I guess that resonated with me because there are modern day, like present day efforts to look at how can we use modern genetic techniques to do things like, let's say, enable somebody with a hereditary disease to not pass it down to their kids, that kind of stuff, sort of post-selecting particular traits possibly in the future. And that I think is definitely a needed conversation. You know, this is intrinsically a type of treatment that might be exclusive to the very wealthy or the very powerful, and democratizing that is something that I think should be a priority insofar as it's feasible in the future. I don't think like we're, or I can't imagine that like the goals of the philosophical movement are readily achievable in the near term, but at least getting that conversation going, I think, is a good idea.
Great points. We're going to go over to Reagan now.
Yeah, I see the problems with genetic engineering. You know, there are some, you know, very valid to me treatments for, you know, genetic repairs for things like cancer and things like that, that clearly are immediately and readily beneficial to individuals without causing any harm to others. But there's also some genetic traits that can be arguable, and whether or not we want to uniformly eliminate those across the species might, you know, cause the kind of problems that, you know, the fellow described in monoculture. For example, the gene traits that cause sickle cell anemia also provide defenses against malaria. And, you know, how are you going to choose which one of those is valuable? I don't know. There's also gene sequences, a rather complex collection of them that are known to be precursor requirements. They aren't the exclusive requirements, but they're the precursor requirements for psychopathology, according to an author named James Fallon, who studied neurology of psychopathology. And it turns out evolutionarily that gene sequence provided a survivability trait for the species in terms of producing a very small percentage of a tribal population that could provide leadership in times of danger, either environmental danger from predator animals or from aggression from other tribes. You know, how do you want to call those? Now, those can be managed, like the other fellow described about deliberate choice in mate potential for producing children. If you can minimize the concentration of those gene traits, you can get the benefits of one without the consequences of the other. This is an interesting problem.
Right.
I think we also need to deal with the threat to the species in terms of environmental, chemical or radiological damage. I understand that the sperm counts of males have dropped 60% since 1945. That's a direct threat to the species.
Great points. Great points, Reagan. So before we move on, I want to read something that Tommy put in the chat because I think it's important. He said he would love to enter the debate, but he has no idea how transhumanism is wanting to enhance the human species. I also share the same question. So before we go to Cezary, I want to ask Stacy if you can elaborate on that.
Well, I wrote a little something, but I think Daniel is going to be the best person to answer this. I think they're talking about, they call it wetware, which is computer chips, like what Elon Musk is talking about. He has tapped into pigs' brains so that they can, when they're snuffling on something, it hits, I don't know, it's tied to mental telepathy with chips and that kind of thing, technology that you can add to your body, but there's more to it than that. And Daniel, can you help me out here?
Yeah, one of Elon's companies is Neuralink, and they've done preliminary experiments with direct electrode implants into a pig, I believe, and they've shown some, promising results. Now, of course, the main application is with people who have had medical injuries, who are paralyzed and, or blind, or, don't have full normal use of human faculties. So, I mean, that's a huge population there. And I don't think anyone would deny, a differently abled person the right to regain their human usage through a technology like that. But of course, it's a slippery slope because now you've opened the door to augmented human capabilities. So there's going to need to be some ethical, interventions on this as a society at some point, in my opinion. Thanks.
Great. So just to sum up what Daniel said before we continue, I believe Daniel is saying that that the idea of transhumanism is to help people who may not be able to enjoy the full entirety of the human experience, maybe people who are disabled, so we can provide technology to help them have a better human experience. But there's a limit, because how far are we going to go to where instead of helping the human race, we end up hurting it? That was okay. Daniel's nodding, so I guess that was a good summary. So now we're gonna go to Cezary. You are next. Then it will be me, and then it will be Anne.
So, so people have this fascination with this, this superhuman or overhuman, but people forget about the underhuman. What about them? Because people are trying to imagine what it would be like to have these overhumans and humans, but we already have some basis of comparison for that. What you could say underhuman, and I don't mean this to be in a derogatory sense, it's just for the sake of the example, because there are people who are have like different intellectual disabilities, you could say, learning disabilities, people with Down syndrome, and those traits are actively selected against for. And I must say that until a couple days ago, my mind was quite clearly made up that, okay, well, no, I thought I didn't think that it was a good thing, but guess what? I've been attending these meetings of the Citizen Network, and there are a lot of people, differently abled people there. And I got to tell you, these people are smarter than a lot of the ordinary people that I meet. They don't have the same ego problems that normal humans do. So, it's, and so it gave me a lot of perspective, because these people are people, and they're still doing things. They're engaging, they're leading, they are serving their communities, they're coming together, they have lives, and they're living valuable lives. And so, so to have this conversation, well, yeah, let's just eliminate people like that, because, on our path to this overhuman thing, well, there are these other people, and guess what? They have a voice, and they come together and they express that voice, and they're like, you're dissing us. And yeah, so, again, I meant that as, just really for comparison, this whole concept of the underhuman, but they're human, and, they have a voice, and frankly, in many ways, it's better than the regular humans. So my point is, people are bad at this. People suck at this. People are dumb. And so you're going to give dumb people the ability to select, to keep fueling their stupid, their patterns, yeah, this is not going to end up well. The other thing I wanted to add to that, just the last thing is right, because of all this genetic diversity, there are many benefits that we don't really realize right up front. And one of those things is, I was just thinking that, our ability for compassion is largely, I think, based on, on being able to relate, somebody who's in a different situation. So, in a sense, eliminating all these traits, it's going to breed out the need for compassion, because everybody will be superiorly abled or whatever. So you don't really, obviously it's more complicated than that, but compassion in many ways, it's practiced, it's rewarded by us exercising it in all these many different circumstances, and by it building our social bonds. So yeah, so it's, you're talking about affecting a very large system, just with a very poor understanding of how everything is connected. And like I said, people are really bad at this. I'm all for decentralization, including decentralization of evolution. Oh, but one last thing I wanted to say, speaking of decentralization, but at the same time, because this does pertain to the issue of abortion and how that pertains to, how that pertains to a woman's control over her own body and, personhood. So that is an aspect of decentralization, that to some extent, people will be making personal decisions that will affect evolution. They will be, maybe if they're not manipulating the genes, they might be selectively eliminating some development possibilities, perhaps terminating certain pregnancies for certain things. I think that is a much more of a personal choice than it is to actually tweak your infant's genes or something like that. That is a different thing, or your embryos. Those are different things. Maybe you won't disagree, but I don't think it's as arrogant. I mean, yeah, I can understand how a mother or parents in certain situations, they might feel that a child of a certain kind, they're not able to care for that child. It's, I think that is their choice, but it's not the same thing as like, hey, let's have a baby of this color, this tall, and with these powers. It's a very different relation to the issue. So I think it's more humble, to put it simply. But thank you. I yield the floor.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So what we're gonna have to do now is we're running out of time. So to anybody else who wants to speak, we're just gonna do 1.5 minutes max, so that way everybody can get in. So Daniel's usually our timer. Daniel, would you like to time? I can't see if
Let me go later, like 5th or something.
But did you want to be the timer though?
No, it's time. Oh, I'm not set up to do it right now. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Oh, Cezary did make a good point. We did start a little bit late. Okay, well, we will just try to be mindful of time, and we'll wrap up soon. I believe I'm next. I'll be quick. I want to comment on something that Cynthia mentioned, which I agree with, that the whole eugenics movement in the US at least is pretty much proof enough that people really can't be trusted with it. If you really look into it, you'll see that the eugenics movement in America actually laid the foundation for what happened in Nazi Germany during World War II. So there's an issue that leads to that. Also, I think a really in-depth understanding of health would make a lot more sense in this, because so to comment on something that Reagan brought up earlier, some people might carry genes that make them more susceptible to cancer. But if we actually understand how cancer and other diseases, and I really want to make the distinction between dis-ease, just a state that your body is not in ease, actually a lot of it really has to do with health on a fundamental level. So a lot of times what can happen is if you have unhealthy parents, likely they're going to produce weaker children, because everything starts on a cell level. If you have healthy cells, you can be a healthy and strong person, no matter, what happens. I was born with something that was genes that were handed down from my father that was brittle bone disease. So he broke a ton of bones his entire childhood, passed it on to me. But I've now learned through health and nutrition, I can actually repair my bones without any need of medical intervention. So I would not, like it if the government told me that I can't reproduce because I'm carrying this gene. So I think that's when the problem arises. I also want to mention again the case of Carrie Buck, who was forcibly sterilized in America in the, I think, early mid-1900s, because the court, Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Supreme Court justice, deemed her an imbecile, and that 3 generations of imbeciles in her family was enough. And that case also went on to the forced sterilization of over 40,000 Americans. So I agree with Cezary in that we should completely decentralize this, and no central government should ever tell you, what you can do in that realm. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Anne, who is next.
Yeah, I'll try to stay within a minute and a half. I pretty much agree with all the cautionary notations folks have made. I think realistically, that's not going to happen. And this is going to be partially because of the vast disproportionate portion of our Commonwealth controlled by such a smaller and smaller minority of people. Those people are going to go ahead and promote these kind of technologies for the enhancement of themselves. And, then secondarily, they're going to promote the sort of eugenics kind of thing, it seems to me, for the rest of us towards a monoculture that would be easily, would not draw a lot of resources because these health demands would be eliminated. We'd all have a certain health flatline, and meanwhile, they would continue, because this technology is not going to be inexpensive. It's not going to be available. The enhancing kind of technology is not going to be available to everybody. It's not even a majority of people. And so, yeah, I see that, or else if it's not like in a capitalist system, the rich, then I see it in an autocratic system like the People's Republic of China. Where they may do certain things to create an army. I mean, they already did things where there were forced abortions when they had the one-child policy, which they've now relaxed to two children, partially because it was creating a disproportionate number of males. But that's after the horse cart, the horse is out of the barn, which is usually the way these things go. But I think we can never really expect true decentralized control till we flatten out the distribution of wealth. And that doesn't seem to be happening. It's getting worse. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anne. Very interesting points. So Tommy is next, and after Tommy will be Reagan. Tommy, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I'm totally against transhumanism in this sense, of using technology to enhance the human species as far as integrating it as a what do they call that? I don't know, different words they give it, humanoid or whatever. I could see the pros in it, to be able to enhance based on putting technology into people, and then it enhances their ability to enhance their brain, their body, their thinking, their memory, and then through that, with the placebo effect, with energy, it would help contribute to their body's upgrade in that sense as a support or an assistant. Right. So, so I believe in more of a natural way, not in, needing technology to do it. I believe every human being can enhance their lives based on their own energy, and knowing how to utilize that through meditation and through yoga practices. So that's my take on it, real quickly.
Great. Thank you, Tommy. Interesting points. I agree. I will now go over to Reagan.
What happens when everybody wants their daughters to look like Angelina Jolie and their sons to look like Brad Pitt? What's the world going to look like with everybody looking like them? You can't even define beautiful or ugly. They all look the same.
Was that all? Okay. Interesting, because it's a beauty in that sense too is very subjective. So great point. So Cezary has his hand up next.
Well, I'm fine with everyone looking like Angelina Jolie. Oh, okay, she's not my favorite, Scarlett Johansson. And so,
I was going to say, I'm not sure everybody would agree with that about Angelina Jolie, but okay.
I was thinking of Margot Robbie, but I couldn't remember her name.
I kind of forgot I was thinking about how economics ties into this because, okay, the concept of decentralization. What I mean by decentralization is that people should take this responsibility into their own hands. And what I mean by centralization, what I mean is fads or certain ideals. That's where the centralization would lie. That everybody says, oh, we have to eliminate this, we have to eliminate this, we have to make things more like this, make things more like that. So it's really like this mental centralization, this idealized version of humans would start to permeate the culture, and then everybody would try to. That's where the centralization would come from. I don't mean the centralization would come from the government. Potentially, the government could play a role in decentralizing this idealization by actually preventing, like forbidding and penalizing people for doing this. But that's usually never a good way of doing things. Criminalizing things, that's usually people find a way around it. So then, okay, and of course, I'm sure they're gonna do it, and I think they're already there are laws like you can't for testing on, I forgot what it is, but like experimenting with like human embryos or something, like you can't do that. There are laws against it. But you can't really do that because eventually, as this technology gets better and better, because you might be able to forbid it, even if you stop it in one country, another country might not do that. The US might stop it, but China won't stop it. So you can't really do that legally to force people to decentralize from this ideal perspective. And I think the thing that would potentially centralize it the most is actually, if, like, I don't know, like a couple has like a genetically enhanced child, as long as that child is able to then interbreed with a child, from a family that has not been genetically enhanced, then at least there is that level of variety and decentralization. And the only way to kind of ensure that, or to maximize the possibilities, is if there are no economic barriers, because if you're not creating economic castes, usually people with money, they try to keep that money and they try to marry other people with money. So as long as there's not that barrier, as long as everybody is economically somewhat equal, then they will still interbreed with others. So potentially it would allow some people to genetically enhance their children. It would let other couples not do it, but it would be kind of a mix of both evolution and genetic enhancement. Maybe that ultimately, I think that's actually the most realistic thing, because it probably is impossible to stop it. I think Anne was making that point. But anyways.
Sorry, yeah, we're gonna have to, it was a little bit over 90 seconds, just so we can get any last comments in before we move to closing remarks. I'm next, Stacy's next. This is the last chance for anybody to type hand up if they'd like to participate in the debate before we close. I actually just want to kind of read what I had mentioned in here earlier. So when we talked about, enhancing the human experience, I think nature already provided us with everything we need to have to enjoy the best human experience. It's all right in front of us. We're just kind of, our perception of what that means has been altered by people who understand the real nature of reality. So I think instead of adding on these new ideas, we should just actually take more away and go within. There's many things you could do to enhance. Tommy, I'll recommend too. Raw liver can really help. More vitamin A, it's been proven to help with people improve their eyesight too. There's also things like sun gazing as well, just to look into and see if it's something that you would do. There's many, many ways naturally to enhance the human experience. As I mentioned in the chat, if you want higher brain function, one of the best things you could do is eat animal brain. It's loaded with omega-3s and everything your brain needs to thrive. So those are my comments on that. I think that once again, everything we already need to have the best experience is right in front of us. We just need to open up our eyes and see. Now we will go to Staci, who is next.
You guys have hit the nail on the head, and it is a really big reason why I brought this idea up, that we don't need these things to become enhanced human beings. We can do that through meditation and acts and going inside. But I think the idea is that this way of enhancing ourselves is here to stay. People are going to pursue that, and we need to be aware and involved. But it is not the only way. You're right. Nail on the head. It is not the only way to become an enhanced human. We can do it ourselves.
Beautiful. Love that, Staci. So I believe Daniel is next, and I see Cynthia has her hand up, so she'll be after Daniel.
Okay, let me start my clock just a second here. Okay, yeah, I think society does have an interest in regulating certain things like nuclear weapons, that could be destructive on a mass level to the commons, and potentially runaway human augmentation, has that kind of potential. I think, I mentioned in the chat that when Plato wrote about Atlantis and they destroyed themselves, he was trying to make a allegorical statement about transhumanism. But at this point, it's definitely a philosophical movement. For some people, it's definitely a set of life goals. The two should not be confused. And yeah, I do believe in using our natural augmentation capabilities, which we probably have been kept from learning about, in many ways, with natural mindfulness, natural nutrition. So maybe that explains actually why there's such a rush to technological versions, of augmentation. So it's a fascinating topic, and I'm glad to be, that's kind of why I'm running for city council, is just at least I can get these transhumanist debate ideas into the greater public mindset. So that's about my time, and pass the floor.
Okay, great. We're going to go to Cynthia, and Cezary will be the last person speaking after, and we'll go into closing remarks. So Cynthia, take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, although I completely agree with what you're saying, to speak to Alex's point, because they are either developing or have already developed technology that would, in essence, rid one of the gene for cancer, rid one of the gene for tuberculosis, whatever hereditary disease you can think of. That would fall under this header. So although yes, everyone has the capacity to self-actualize if they choose to do so, how would y'all speak to that? And I'm just curious, because it seems like it kind of got a little bit off topic here, and I do see the benefit in what we're talking about. I just don't think people can be trusted with that kind of power. I cede the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Cezary, you did have your hand up, so go ahead.
Actually, now that I think about it, I think people should be genetically engineered, and only men, or only males. And I think males should be genetically engineered to all have equally sized penises. And I think the size of the penis should be legislated by females. So yeah, females decide on how long the male penises are. I think it would, honestly, I would think it would solve so many of our worlds.
You're making Stacy blush.
I would be genetically inclined to want two penises.
Huh. All right. Well, interesting way to end the conversation. Before we go into closing remarks, I want to ask if Staci wants to comment on anything that was mentioned.
I'm laughing too hard. Closing remarks, please.
Okay, sure. So we'll go ahead and move into closing remarks. But before that, we're actually going to go ahead and measure support for the idea. So just show of hands, who now supports this idea? Okay, we have Alex, we have Cezary, Stacy, Sherwin. We converted Sherwin. And that is it. And Daniel still supports it. Okay, so everyone that supports it is Alex, Cezary, Daniel, Stacy, and Sherwin. Now, is anybody supporting this idea in Egora now or planning on it? Okay. We have Alex, Cezary, Stacy, and Sherwin. Great. So now we will go ahead and move into closing remarks. Alex, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I don't have a problem if somebody wants to put a chip in their brain. I think the discussion really needs to be geared towards the societal implications of such technology. And I think already there's a good sort of discussion in that community about the ethics of these sorts of practices and how they're to be applied. But luckily, they're not, for the most part, not being applied frivolously at the moment. So I hope that continues.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Daniel, do you have any closing remarks to share?
I'm just glad to be a force for greater public awareness of existential risks. A lot of them are man-made, a lot of them aren't. We depend on the power grid, which people in Texas realized how fragile that was a few weeks ago. They were actually something like 7 minutes from a total grid shutdown. And when that happens, the grid is the most complex machine humans have ever built. And it's a weeks or even months long process to bring it back online. And there's another threat people don't know about, the nuclear power plant cooling ponds. They require constant pump water circulation, and there's only 2 weeks of backup fuel. So if there had been an extended grid outage, you would have a bunch of little Chernobyls. There's more radiation in a nuclear fuel cooling pond than in 40,000 nuclear warheads. So it's a real problem that we're not looking at also.
Well, they would just shut down the reactors before they let that happen.
It's not the reactors, it's the cooling ponds.
They shut down the reactors before they melted down.
I'm talking about the cooling ponds need constant
Hot potato.
water.
Okay, do we want to go into one?
Are we in closing or?
Okay, yeah, we're in closing remarks. So actually what I'll go ahead and do though, I will pass it to Reagan if you want to go ahead and share closing remarks.
Oh, I'm with Mary Shelley when she wrote Frankenstein. This is very dangerous. If you're going to do massive re-engineering of the human genome, hers was a warning about basically playing God. If we inadvertently create a monoculture, even with one gene, because everybody has that one gene, and a bioorganism, a virus, whatever, evolves, and it will, until it attacks that in a really aggressive, destructive way, we will end as a species. And we've already seen some dangers of this in genetically modified grains, corn, wheat, potatoes, rice, barley, the five main, we already had an example of that in Ireland in the 1840s. We know what happens when you plant essentially a monoculture, at least as from the perspective of the potato beetle. We don't need that again.
Really great points, Reagan. Cezary, you are up if you'd like to share closing remarks.
I already spent all my best ideas. But yeah, bananas, the kind of bananas that everybody eats right now, there's like a fungus that's actually spreading, and they're only going to exist for like 5 more years on the markets. Actually, there's a really cool video about this. It's because there used to be a different kind of a banana, and it was much better. But that was like, it was like in the 50s or 60s or something like that. And then, but this, but there were all these monocultures, and this, whatever, something else wiped them out. and now there's a fungus that's spreading from continent to continent. They can't really stop it. And so, and actually, but the thing is, there are some bananas from the other kind of bananas. They still do exist, but they're just very finely like isolated in like small, like you would spend like $50 on a few bananas for the old strain of bananas so they will still always exist, but they won't be able to probably for like centuries to repopulate again until that fungus goes away. Anyways, the same thing, very much like Reagan was saying, the same thing awaits humans and it would be a great science fiction story, But again, maybe the one thing that can solve it is the fact that some people are not, as long as not everybody is doing this genetic enhancement, maybe that will kind of balance things. Some things will do it, some people will do it, some people don't. As long as people keep interbreeding, then it might not become a problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cezary. I'm going to jump over to Cynthia. Do you have any closing remarks to share?
Why, yes, I do. Thank you so much. First, love and gratitude for this conversation. It was amazing. And I know this is going to shock a lot of people in the room, but I can both agree and disagree with this idea. Although I do see the benefit of it, I can also see a very significant downside, because once people start monkeying with things and realize how far they can go with stuff, they can't help but to go there, and that has ended badly historically for thousands of years. So that's all I had to say. I'm very grateful, and thank you very much. Love you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Always love your positivity. Tommy, would you like to share your closing remarks?
Yeah, it's a great idea that was brought up. I just never, I already heard of this as far as different words, but not transhumanism. And yeah, just I fully support the body's ability to do it ourselves, always. And that's my pursuit in life, to help people enhance themselves based on their own power. Yep, that's it.
Great. Thanks so much, Tommy. Stacy, do you have closing remarks to share?
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was great commentary. We really, I think, tore this one apart, and there's more that we can say about it, I'm sure, but I really appreciate the input, and I think that we did a great job, and thank you guys so much for coming and sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacy, for presenting. Sherwin, would you like to share your closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's hard to reverse the advancement of technology. But of course, our goal is always how do we benefit the most? And I guess I'm glad that GMO foods were mentioned. Obviously, awareness, as Stacy said, is key. When we didn't even know they were called GMO, we just suffered the consequences without the need for regulation or the ability to fight back. While of course, even gun control is important as a regulation for the advancement of weapons, I guess, but I just wonder whether regulations themselves could be democratized, that be more. I guess it comes, let the people decide what should be regulated or not. Because I wonder what would happen if aliens attacked and we need to engineer superhumans. I guess we're gonna have to do it, Whereas right now we don't need it, so maybe we won't. I don't know. But I yield.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherwin. I always admire your neutral stance and being able to look for both sides. Anne, would you like to share your closing remarks with us?
Yeah, I think this will be fascinating to watch how this comes upon us. And I can think of a scenario, for example, it'll come, say tomorrow, they say, this is now have a genetic modification we'd like to, have everyone accept, which would prevent, which would give resilience to COVID. And so you think about it, well, that's a genetic modification, and who knows, what else gets modified at the same time. But the next day you wake up and work tells you you can't come to work unless you get that genetic modification. I mean, that's the way these things are going to come down, unless we kind of step out of the mainstream manias and look at these things a little more long term and within a bit larger context. But right now, the way the population's sent off in different directions, it seems like at the press of a viral Twitter, we're going to let these things roll over us with no resistance whatsoever.
Great points, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing. So that leaves my closing remarks. I love what Cynthia just said. She said, instead of asking, can we should ask, should we? I think it's a very great question. I would say before we even talk about anything transhumanism, we really need to clean up the mess that us humans have already caused to ourselves and to this planet, including, so many things, health system, food system, school system, all of that. We need to really clean that up and analyze that and make that better before we start talking about how we can realize our full potential. So I think it was a great discussion. So thank you so much, Staci, for presenting. And thank you, Anne, so much for joining us. I think it was your first time. And Reagan, thank you too. I'm not sure if you've attended before. Was this your first time?
To this meeting, I have been to the one that started an hour previous last week for the first time.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much. We hope that you guys will come back. We do this every Tuesday at the same time. You guys both have a great insight.
By the way, that last question about could we or should we, that came up in an incident at, I think it was Duke University, where a geneticist 30 years ago developed a virus that was a very simple virus, so it was very effective. All it did was produce a protein that binded with the surface of the ova, causing infertility, and he had invented it as a possible birth control system. But he didn't know that viruses can exchange genetic material with each other, and if it ever got out, we would be forced to reproduce ourselves by using in vitro fertilization exclusively. Think about the consequences of that. He just figured out that he could, never thought about whether he should.
Interesting. Great way to end our discussion tonight. So that is all for our viewers and listeners. If you like this idea, don't forget to support it in Egora-ilp.org. Also in Egora, you'll find information about our upcoming meetings, and then you can also join our Facebook group, which is Citizen Assembly. You just type it in and you will find us. So thank you guys so much for attending.